I could have been talking to you in French or Dutch or Portuguese, but instead I'm here using the Queen's most boring language, English. How easily it could have been me going off in French as Bonjour et bienvenue la historia de Inde. Alas, but why? Why did English come out on top? Or rather, how did the English, or more specifically the East India Company, beat out? Hello and welcome to Ventak, where I'll be making videos about history and maybe other things. I am Venkat, an amateur history nerd who is running out of friends in real life to talk to about history. This is the first of a series that will cover the colonization of India. For a country that still hasn't gotten over its colonial hangover, we rarely stop to understand how the colonizers actually came to colonize us. Understanding how they accomplished this nigh impossible tasks lets us understand the power structures that were present during colonial time and the same power structures we still feel today. The British had no real advantage over any other European powers of the time. They didn't have the first mover advantage, they didn't have the best ships, nor any monetary or militaristic edge. The first were the Portuguese. The Portuguese, as we all know it, discovered India in 1498 when Vasco da Gama landed upon the shores of Calicut. He secured the trading rights with the Zammarin of Calicut, the ruler back then, but he was unable to pay the price of his goods or the taxes in gold. So, reasonably, the Zammarin detained a few of his agents as security for his payment. And in revenge, Vasco da Gama kidnapped 16 fishermen and a bunch of natives and just kept them as part of a hostage negotiation. In the end, he just left Calicut and went back to Portuguese, taking those fishermen with him, and we still don't know what happened to those poor souls. Following this, the Portuguese had almost a 100-year monopoly of trade with India. They moved most of the spice that was available in Europe, and the Portuguese armadas carried roughly what would be worth today $105 million to $300 million worth of gold in every armada. They sent an armada almost every year for almost 100 years throughout the 16th century. And to put it into context, this is the same amount of money that would take Ambani 12 whole days to make, which is a lot of days. During these expeditions, the Portuguese set up a lot of forts, trading centers, and factories across India. The Portuguese had established trade centers in Goa, Bombay, Madras, and Cochin, and as far north as Hooghly and Chittagong. Some of these places it would continue to control less than just a century ago. Okay, quick side note, a factory or a factory town was a name commonly given to a free trade zone or a transshipment point. At a factory, local merchants could trade with foreign traders, and these were official points that were established as points of trade for European traders. Many of these factories would go on to become some of the biggest cities of India today. And this is a word you'll hear used across this period of Indian history. Anyway, by the end of the 16th century, the Portuguese had fought multiple powers in and around the Indian subcontinent, so much so that they would establish themselves as the Rome of the East. Some of these powers included the Zammarin of Calicut, the Mamluk Egyptians, the Bijapur Sultanate, the Gujarat Sultanate, and the Ottoman Empire, to name just a few. And then the 17th century rolled in. With that came the Dutch from Southeast Asia, where they'd already fought and struggled against British and Portuguese traders. And we all know exactly where this is heading. The Dutch-Portuguese War, fought between 1598 and 1663, saw the Dutch dismantle the Portuguese empire in its wake. The Dutch took large chunks of the Portuguese colonial empire, including Ceylon from the Portuguese in 1656, and forts across the Malabar coast in the next 5 years. This vast control from the Malabar coast to the Spice Islands of the Malacca Strait gave the Dutch VOC a monopoly of spice trade. Right around the same time, the British were docking their first ships on Indian soil. making their first landfall in Surat in 1608. By 1611, the EIC had already set up a factory in Assam and another in Surat in 1615. English traders frequently fought their Dutch and Portuguese counterparts all across the Indian Ocean. But the company achieved a major victory over the Portuguese in the Battle of Swali in 1612 in Surat. With this, the company decided to explore a feasibility of a foothold in mainland India, with official sanctions from both the British and the Mughal Empire, and requested that the crown launch a diplomatic mission. In 1615, Thomas Roe was sent as the ambassador of James I to Jahangir's court. Roe was able to secure important privileges for the British. Roe's relationship with Jahangir is what most historians would describe as best friends. They were drinking partners. Roe gifted the emperor crates of wine, the best of French fashion, and even a miniature of his own wife. Anyway, the British understood and co-opted into the Mughal imperial system and made themselves irreplaceable at the royal court. Once firmly rooted within the system, they were able to leverage their network to push out their competition, either by currying favors or placing some well-placed bribes. So the next time someone says why there's so much corruption in India, we can all happily blame the British. Or Nehru, I guess, I don't care. The British understood the importance of court drama and the power of rumours. This is something that we'll explore in further detail in the following episodes. Another ingenious way the British monetized their assets was by renting out their sepoys as mercenaries. The British had already invested in small armies, first to defend their land holdings, and then got the idea to rent them out as mercenaries. In the 17th century, the East India Company forces supported the Sultan of Golconda in his conflicts with neighbouring powers, such as the Mughal Empire itself. Company support provided military assistance and forming alliances that were advantageous for their trading interests, but also served to bolster the Sultan's position. With losses in battles and worsening economic conditions back home, the Portuguese were eclipsed by the EIC in terms of trade. By 1647, the company had 23 factories and settlements in India and 90 employees. The 7 islands of Bombay were presented to the English crown in 1661 as part of a dowry of Catherine Baragnazar to Charles II of England, keeping alive important Indian traditions. In the mid-17th century, the Dutch turned their attention to the Spice Islands and the British to mainland India. This decreased direct competition for the EIC and the VOC and allowed them to establish their powers much stronger. At the same time, the French were establishing a similar trading company as the EIC, with goals set on trade partnerships across mainland India. With this, the British had almost a clear path to an Indian trade monopoly, barring the pesky French and some coastal holdouts by the Dutch. But they had no plans of conquest. This wasn't something that they remotely considered. For a tiny island nation across the world to challenge the might of the Mughal Empire at that time would be a foolish thought. Yet, we all know how it turned out. After edging you along this entire episode in the name of context, catch us on the next episode as we dwell deeper into how the British colonized India. So, that was this video. Thank you so much. Hit like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know what you think, what I should do better. Do you guys like these posters? Too much? Too less? I don't know.